Thank you all for coming, and thank you for the introduction, very kind introduction. First of all, I want to introduce Professor Picon, the speaker for this afternoon. Mr. Picon was graduate from Sorbonne University, get his master, and then get his PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. His PhD dissertation is in Vietnam intellectual circle in the early 20th century. But what Mr. Picon most famous is that he had spent more than 10 years in Cambodia, starting from year 1999 until 2009. And he started an institute all by himself. It's called the Center of Khmer Studies in Sam Yuen. This culture and it's a very important center in Cambodia, especially after the peace negotiations started and the stability had been restored back in Cambodia. Why that is important, as our introduction has just mentioned, is because the gravity of this Cambodia tragedy. That during the Khmer Rouge rule and the Pol Pot regime, there had been a quarter of the population being killed at that time. The whole population is like less than 7 million, and then there's 1.7 million being dead. Why that had been the strategy, had been the discussion of a very long and from all sides. But I think a lot of people have to be responsible for this. It's not only the dictator Pol Pot itself, but there's a common mentality exists at Cambodia at that time. Right after that strategy, 20 years from that, the same thing happened in former Yugoslavia. And that thing had been going through a lot of media coverage, but not what's happening in Cambodia is still a mystery for a lot of us. At that time, there's a Vietnam War going on, and the attitude of China, whether China had been secretly supporting Khmer Rouge, is a matter still under investigation. And there's a trial that is going on. If everyone had remembered that a couple of months ago, there's a Commodore Doig. He is the commanding officer of a detention center. During the detention center, a lot of people have been killed. I think there's 1,500 people and there's only 3 survivors. But he is not the only one who is giving the order. He is only the first trial. Following, there's going to be 4 leading members of Khmer Rouge is going to get trial. I think from the trial, we will know more about why they made the decisions and what the international context was, and that will be a reminder for us to prevent the tragedy happening again. So I will give you Professor Picon to discuss with you his experience and maybe his explanation of what's happening in Cambodia at that time.
Good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this wonderful gathering, namely especially Professor Lu Minh Tai, whom I met in the Netherlands, where I work now, just 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and who invited me to come to give this presentation on the occasion of my visit to Taiwan for my work. And I, of course, accepted because I was very much myself impressed by her dedication and the forcefulness of her presentation, which she gave to a similar audience in Leiden in the Netherlands a few months ago to discuss another example of, I think, human tragedy, recent human tragedy, in this case in the, China and Taiwan. I would also like to thank the people from the foundation, and especially Mrs. Li Yingping, the director, who has been helping me and with whom I've been in contact all along to prepare this meeting, and who has introduced me also to a lot of very interesting people here in Taiwan during this week. And last but not least, I want to thank also the people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who took care of me and my colleague for 1 week here in Taiwan, and Mrs. Sophia Wang, who is here. I want to thank you also on this occasion. I think before I begin my presentation, we are going to present a short film. Okay, this film, I was in Cambodia almost 3 weeks ago now, and I know a lot. I mean, throughout the period I was in Cambodia, I worked with a number of organizations that work often very much on a very shoestring basis to rebuild some element of normalcy in Cambodian society. And one of them is this institute or center called Bopana, which is a center that was set up by a Cambodian filmmaker who is himself a survivor of the Khmer Rouge genocide. He lived in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge period from 1975 to 79, and he was one of those refugees in the refugee camps in Thailand who ended up in France. And he developed his skill as a filmmaker. And for the last few years, he has become a world-renowned filmmaker. His name is Ritipan. I don't know if you heard his name, Ritipan. A number of his movies have been shown, including at the Cannes Festival, and he received a number of awards. I really encourage you, if you have a chance, to watch some of his films. They're not always very, I would say, light-hearted. They're pretty, actually, sometimes pretty moving and tough. But these films often give you a very strong sense of the human reality of Cambodia today in this post-genocide period. So anyway, this center, Bopana, was set up, I think, 6 years ago by Ritipan, originally with funding mostly from France, but it's a private organization, and now they receive funding from different sources, including from the US and from Europe and Japan and maybe Taiwan, I don't know. And the purpose of this center is to collect every audiovisual or visual material that relate to Cambodia from before the war, and also about the war and the Khmer Rouge episode, to develop very much this kind of resource center for anybody, and especially Cambodians, to access this part of their heritage. The film that you will see is basically a small piece that was developed by one of the young Cambodian, I would say, filmmakers whom Ritipan has been training, and that very much grasp what the Center Bopana is doing. So beyond Bopana, that's why I thought it would be maybe a good document for you to see today. I think what is interesting is that it touches upon many issues that I hope I will be able to talk about, namely issues about memory, about post-war trauma, and also the issue, the main problem, I think, in terms of, which is about the transmission and sense of ownership between generations, especially when you have had such abrupt episode in the life of many of the Cambodians. So this is a very short movie, but I okay, so have a look at it and we will talk later on. Thank you.
Kia nó mất cái hai là kia không màu chẳng ổn.
Bạn kia hai là kia không màu cả vì năm một vòng 479 là dương châu một đo phim á. Đã hỏi nó bàn nón người châu máu nơi nơi kia nó này sẽ cần nhìn không màu người slap nơi lực kia này. Chẳng hỏi bàn nón hiện đại thôi chúng là kia không màu là kia không màu. Tay và vì ông về bắt phải sạch lối chỉ máu ngay đi anh. Tăng cho ôn khét kỳ bong tới đòi miền Tây xây bong về tự nhiên à. Về đi đòi ọt tròn cùng bà. Cái khi sớm mai mình sân kiếm sai chuyện cùng ai cả xa dùng nơi phần việc cầm một chiều dùng miền trào lõ hỏi đầm là cá của bạn ở đà lấy dương kịch qua làm vinh miền ai ta khác về sông khăn dương kịch cu làm vinh rồi dương thay xa tục tới nó thay xa tục bọc vừa tới na đờ ai cả xa na sông khăn dương mưa tục chùm lòn làm vinh máu đôi ba khiêm chỉ tới tại sạch đại bảo vật sang cho đó có khiêm một lọ bằng khơi ai cái sao đó bị chết sang cả bên máu hơi khiêm có cũng sâu vừa đang chụp hàng bì bảo vật sang và có thể cầm chỉ là đài chập tăng việc khiêm một thưa ca nơi 100 đô bô phana máu khiêm thưa ca thì trang từ lời ai cái sao thằng đi khiêm mơ thì đừng đọt ngay tôi chỉ nói khiêm vô đông bản trang nằm pi bảo vật sang ở bang Campuchia khiêm đang viên bảo vật sang này đó mình chụp nón cào ai ban vô đông.
Okay, so well, I hope you enjoyed this short movie. I think it's quite emotional, I think. I mean, I don't know, for many people. And it very much points to this problem that Cambodian people now have to deal, especially with regard to their recent history, how to make sense of this history themselves. I mean, we are here to discuss about how to make sense, but they have themselves, especially them, have to face, especially the young generation, to face up with what happened. Basically, I will try to give you, I think, first a kind of an introduction to the history of Cambodia. As you know, Cambodia is located in mainland Southeast Asia. Today, the Cambodian borders are adjacent to Vietnam on the east, Laos on the north, and Thailand on the west. The surface of the country is relatively small as to what it used to be at some point in the history of the Khmer people. We are in Southeast Asia, which, as you may know, has been always a kind of a crossroad between different influences and cultures. And particularly in the case of Cambodia, this region was largely influenced by Indian elements, cultural elements, from a very early age. Basically from the 1st or 2nd century AD, you see this process that a number of scholars have described as the Indianization of Southeast Asia that also includes countries such as regions like Indonesia, Thailand, and so on. And many of the features of today's Cambodian society and culture are very much rooted in this early influence. In many ways, in terms of the religious beliefs, in terms of the intellectual, moral, philosophical values, Cambodia very much absorbed, the Cambodian or the Khmer, I would say, very much absorbed elements of this culture. In terms of the people who call themselves the Khmer, are in fact of Austronesian origin. The people whom you come across also originally in Vietnam and in Thailand and so on. They, as I said, they absorbed very much these elements of this Indian culture. In many ways, they blended in the way that the Cambodian culture is very different, I would say, from the Chinese culture in that sense. And that this is why in the early period of Western colonization, the Westerners coined the region as Indochina, making the point, it's very, very simplified, and I think it's not always true, but it is true that when you cross the border between today's Vietnam and today's Cambodia, you really feel the even physical difference in the landscape, in the way the soil is cultivated and so on. This is, I think, an important element to understand also that historically, the Cambodians or the Khmer have a very strong sense of historical continuity, which make them feel very aware of their roots as the Khmer. This Indianization process proceeded into shaping a unique civilization, the Khmer civilization, which, well, the map is not there, but which started very much from the seaside and moved further north with the indigenous population and led to the crystallization of this civilization that eventually took the shape of an empire, as we call it today, with as its center of gravity Angkor. I'm very simplifying, it's more complicated. There are different steps, but from the 8th century to the 14th century AD, Angkor, which in Khmer means the great city, and Angkor is based on Sanskrit, it was very much the center of a major empire, continental empire, which covered most of today's Thailand, southern part of Vietnam, southern part of Laos, and even the northern tip of Malaysia. This Khmer Empire, the Khmer Empire very much developed a model, very centralized, with what we know Angkor Wat as one of the temples of the Angkor complex, which itself is a collection of cities that developed, died, and were resurrected by various kings or usurpers to power. Sometimes you had more than one capital at the same time, but more or less you have a sense of continuity with Angkor as the center. Angkor Wat, by the way, being today the most famous of those temples, dates from the 12th century, and it was dedicated to the one king, King Suryavarman II, as a tomb temple. The Angkorian cultural political model, and this is where it is important and where I go back to this Indian background, is interesting in a sense that a unique political culture very much based on the worship of kings as themselves the incarnation of gods, the gods on earth, was the main feature of this culture, political culture. The Khmer, the ancient Khmer, had embraced what we call the Brahmanic religious beliefs, practices, whether being what we would call, and again I'm very cautious because nowadays people are contesting these definitions, following an Hindu tradition with often a strong influence, emphasis on Shiva, God Shiva, the god of destruction and recreation, as often been picked up by Cambodian kings. They all wanted to be somehow regarded as the impersonification of God Shiva. But also Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, which started also more or less at the same time. The ancient, at the same time as Hinduism in this Brahmanic process. What is also interesting is that Sanskrit was the regal language, written language, and official language. But the Khmer language, vernacular language, was also coined in an Indian-originated script. And today's Khmer language derives from elements from southern and eastern India. So it's a very unique alphabet in that sense. What is interesting is that the Khmer, very much the Khmer Empire was not, in a way, if you compare with the Chinese Empire, it was very much a loose structure, even though Angkor was very the center. The notion of clear border, the notion of a clear, realm, political realm, was not there. And that led to a lot of problems because eventually waves of migrants, especially coming from China, settled in the then Khmer Empire. You have the Thai people whom we call the Thai, who are themselves an ethnic group originating from China, moving southward, who settled down within Angkor, the Angkorian Empire. And this eventually, when the central power of the Angkorian kings started to weaken, for many reasons, this led eventually to the fragmentation of the empire. And by the late 14th, early 15th century, this empire with Angkor as its center more or less slowly disintegrated, with the creation of new principalities in Thailand especially, in the west. And in the east, the Khmer were very much, they had a kind of, I would say, a counterpart in this kind of Indianized environment with the Cham people. Cham people who in fact originated from Indonesia, who had settled in today's, the southern part of Vietnam. They themselves underwent slow but irreversible, I think, extinction as a state with the progression of the Vietnamese from the north southward. So by the 14th century, the Khmer Empire was in contact with the Vietnamese. The Cham were no longer really a state. This Vietnamese progression continued to proceed all the way historically until the 19th century. So this is important to understand part of the Cambodian psycho today, which always has in mind the sense of an historical threat coming from the east, especially from the Vietnamese, but also from the west, in the Thai construction of the Thai state. Interesting enough, the Thai very much borrowed from the Cambodian, the script, the language, the religion, and in many ways Angkor Wat or Angkor for many Thai, for most Thai, is also part of their own cultural collective memory. So that's one of the reasons of the problems that you see regularly coming up in the news, the issue of contestation of connection with Angkor. If you visit the Royal Palace in Bangkok, you will see a model of Angkor Wat that dates from King Mongkut in the 19th century in Thailand. But so with the slow collapse of the Khmer Empire, you don't have, as we often think, the end of the Khmer society. You have basically the beginning of a phase of contraction, a movement towards the sea, which corresponds also to historical, meta-historical development with, in China, the change of dynasty between the Ming and Qing, the change of trade routes, including sea trade routes, and the need at this time for people from Southeast Asia to be more closely connected to the sea. So that's not necessarily a sign of decay or decline. It's also a change in the geopolitical economy of the region at the time, which led the Cambodian kings or Khmer kings, or heirs of the Khmer and Korean kings, to settle down near the sea in today's, near today's Phnom Penh. You had a number of capital in the area with direct connection to the sea through arms of the Mekong River. But while you have another major event took place in around the 14th century, when Angkor was still the center of gravity of the Khmer people in the region, was this kind of a spiritual collective crisis that led to the abandonment of Brahmanic religious traditions and the embracement of what we call Theravada Buddhism. Buddhism of the small vehicle, which is today still the main religion practiced by the large majority of the Cambodian people. This Buddhism corresponds to a period, a historical period, in which the worship of god kings, the constant reference to Indian mythical times, etc., were no longer appealing to the people, and a period also where these kings had lost much of their, I think, the capacity to impose themselves upon their people. So it's a period, it's a process in which Buddhism became a very strong, individualized, internalized form of living. It's interesting, by the way, to think that this, I would say, privatization of religion and religious practice is a process that you find in other parts of the world around that time. Some people speculate that this has to do with climate changes at that time, but it is also around the 14th, 15th century, this the big plague crisis across the Eurasian continent, which also shook the minds of a lot of people from China to Europe, and which had a major impact upon the collective psycho. And I think this is interesting because the Cambodian way to practice Buddhism is very, as I say, it's very deeply internalized, interiorized, and it is very different from the one that is practiced in Vietnam, for instance, or in China. Anyway, from the 14th century to the, let's say, to the 18th century, we have no real records on the history of Cambodia, except from sources from outside, from Chinese records, from Thai chronicles, and later on from Vietnamese chronicles. In fact, the Cambodians never lost the practice of writing and recording, but they used palm leaf manuscripts. They used perishable material. The same way they built their own religious temples in perishable material. It's a much more modest and austere forms of religion, and therefore their cultural tradition adapted to these new modes of practicing Buddhism. This means that because of the climate of Cambodia, most of these records have been lost. So I'm making these points because these go against a general interpretation of the history of Cambodia that was developed during the colonial time, which in many ways persists today among most people outside and in Cambodia, which tend to associate the fall of Angkor with the idea that it was the beginning of an irreversible decline and final, death of the Khmer culture, society, and civilization. And most Cambodians still believe in many ways that this is true. And they got that very much from the colonial and post-colonial education that they received at school. So, but it is true that as a political viable entity, Cambodia became increasingly unable to cope against the pressure from its neighbors. And I'm, again, simplifying, but by the end of the 18th century, what we know as Cambodia today didn't really exist. I would not say that as bluntly in Cambodia, but it is in fact true historically. Cambodia, what is today's Cambodia, had become a virtual protectorate of the Vietnamese and the Thai. The Thai controlled, the monarchy controlled, had direct control on Buddhism and the Buddhist order, the monks, the Sangha, whereas the Vietnamese were interested in strategic, political, strategic and military strongholds, and controlling also tax revenue, customs. This may, and both countries, Thailand and Vietnam, were using Cambodian pretendants to the thrones, so you had a terrible period of instability with, depending on when, either the Vietnamese or the Thai being the dominant player in the region. This continued until the intrusion of the Westerners in the region, and especially France, which, as you know, came in the region first by attacking and invading Vietnam. And they settled first in southern Vietnam and took what we know today as Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City as a result of a conquest, a war. At that time, the king of Cambodia saw this event as a great opportunity to maybe change the course of events by inviting the French to give their protection to the Cambodian state. So it was a kind of a clever move. It was not an invasion, colonial invasion that took place, but it was the almost peaceful inclusion of Cambodia into the French colonial realm. What is interesting in that is that this is why the Cambodians are very ambivalent. They don't have much bad feeling about the colonial period. They don't. It's not a big issue for them. On the contrary, many think that it is a period where Cambodia was able again to resurrect as a state. And it is true that the Cambodian state, as we know it today as a nation state, was very much developed from that period, from 1863, very precisely when the French established the Cambodian protectorate. All the elements of a nation state as we know it, a centralized administration, a capital city, a schooling system, a road system, etc., were developed from that period on. Boundary, fixed boundary. And this is an issue, obviously, because the French identified their own quest for control of the region to the interest of the Cambodians in reclaiming some parts of their territory that had been taken over by their neighbors. And the western part of Cambodia, including the region of Angkor, which had been in Thai hands for already 2 centuries, was reclaimed by the French, or reclaimed, as part of Cambodia. This is very important. By the way, the French didn't give back, didn't try to give to Cambodia back areas that the Vietnamese had taken on from the Khmer kingdom. But I think because the Vietnamese would have opposed it too strongly. The French were never very strong in controlling the region in because of the Vietnamese challenge. In Cambodia it was different. But it's what is important with regard to Angkor has more to do with the French and the Europeans at that time than to the Cambodians, although eventually it had a very big impact upon the Cambodians. The French realized the importance of Cambodia, not, okay, of course for strategic and political reason, because they saw Cambodia as well as Laos as some kind of buffer countries between their stronghold in Vietnam and Thailand and beyond British Burma, and it was always the competition between the British and the French. So these countries were kind of buffer. But for the French, what became increasingly important as they tried to build legitimacy over their control over Indochina was Angkor. And that's very interesting, how an historical ancient site was reinvented in its symbolic meaning by foreigners to be turned into a symbol of French Indochina, but by extension also of Cambodian ancient Khmer glory. And this is important because eventually, and some of you maybe have been to Angkor, you have seen that the whole area has been turned into an archaeological park. The monuments have been cleared from the jungle. They've been massively restored, and an enormous work. Actually, perhaps the largest, the most important legacy, French legacy in Cambodia is this archaeological study on Angkor, more than the roads they built or the schools they built, because to be honest, they didn't do a big job. Even compared to, they were much more proactive in Vietnam where they were under pressure, as I mentioned. But in Cambodia, they massively invested on the symbolic political meaning of Angkor for their own claim. And perhaps you know, in 1931, you had this massive colonial exhibition in Paris, which drew 32 million people at that time. And the main landmark of this exhibition was a reconstitution of Angkor Wat, which means that in the collective cycle of many Westerners, Angkor became a very important part of even of their own sense of being, which is fascinating in itself. For the Cambodians, this has a very important meaning, and that leads us to the Khmer Rouge and the issue of the, why the Khmer Rouge episode happened in Cambodia. For the Cambodians, what the French taught them about their home history is very much tainted by the mentality, the colonial mentality of that time, which always emphasized the superiority of the West and Western Europe, and the sense that some civilizations were weaker and were dying, what we call social Darwinism. And what they told the Cambodians basically was, you are the heir of this glorious civilization. You can be proud of this massive, immense Angkorian civilization. However, your civilization fell into decay. And France is here to help you to resurrect it to its past glory. It's a propaganda discourse, and I'm simplifying, but ultimately, this was very much ingrained in Western-educated Cambodians, especially those who were not maybe thinking a bit critically, who could see that the Cambodian past was instrumentalized by the colonial ruler. And this means that, let's say, by the end of the colonial period, around officially Cambodia became fully independent in 1953. But the emerging generation of Western-educated, French-educated Cambodians became a substantial, though very small, part of the population, let's say, from the 40s onwards. It took a long time for Cambodia to have an urban, Western-educated population, the same way you could find in Vietnam at that time. For instance, Cambodia never had a university during the colonial period. Only at the end of the colonial period, it had one high school. It had secondary schools, primaries, but no tertiary education. So the first Cambodian with O-level or baccalaureate received it in the late 30s. So it's a very slow process. But that process is also important beyond this anchor-based discourse that I mentioned. It's also important because the French were involved in, because they tried to control the development of Cambodia and they were worried of Thai influence, especially through Buddhism. They had an impact into modernizing Cambodian Buddhism, which led eventually to the modernization of the Cambodian language and I would say the vernacularization of Cambodian culture into a modern means of expression. By the end of the 30s, you had the first newspapers in Khmer language. So it's a much slower process than what you find in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in China, of course, or in India. But by the end of the 30s, you have the first Cambodian dictionary, the first material novel, for instance, first that are not religious material. So this is important because this also gave the foundation for a new modern Cambodia as we know it. But this was never a process, this was never enough to have a full impact upon the society of Cambodia. By the 1950s, when the French were struggling to maintain the position against especially the Vietnamese communist nationalist movement, the Viet Minh, Cambodian society was still very fragile as a society a functioning society in a nation-state model. And let's say that, but anyway, the French lost their war with Vietnam in 1954. Cambodia became independent just afterwards, before that, in 53. You have, for a period of time from, let's say, 53 to 1970, and I'm simplifying, you have a period of peace in Cambodia, which still today is regarded by Cambodians as the golden age of Cambodia. This corresponds to the period under the leadership of King or Prince Sihanouk. Sihanouk was chosen by the French in 1942 because the French created a system in which they elected the king, which is still in place today, and which is one actually element of instability for Cambodia, political stability. But anyway, Sihanouk proved to be a very remarkable leader, if not versatile and also a bit despotic. Not somebody who was, not a Democrat, I wouldn't say that, but he really wanted his country to modernize and develop. So he managed for a period of time to lead and establish and build Cambodia as this neutral, modern country in a context, in a regional context that was increasingly difficult with, as you know, the Vietnam War, the involvement of the U.S. in Vietnam increasingly from the late 50s and early 60s especially, which eventually led to the fragilization of Sihanouk's policy. Without going into detail, basically Sihanouk thought that Cambodia was too small to be involved and embroiled into this war between North and South Vietnam, and the U.S. being in South Vietnam, and the Soviet and China, Soviet Union and China supporting North Vietnam. And this policy of neutrality proved wise in many ways, although it exposed Cambodia to eventually to the outbursts of power of one of the protagonists in the Vietnam War. And this eventually took place in 1970, when the US, who had been increasingly frustrated by the infiltration of Vietnamese communist infiltration into the territory of Cambodia, decided that they wanted stop this infiltration, and they needed a power in Phnom Penh that could let them stamp out this Vietnamese infiltration. They did so by promoting a coup which took place in 1970 with the short period of the Republic of Cambodia episode with General Lon Nol, or Marshal Lon Nol, as its head of state. It's a very short period, but it's an important one to understand the tragedy that Cambodia went through. Because this power, despite everything, Sihanouk and the monarchy, together with Buddhism, were still very much popular and very, very much deeply entrenched in the collective mentality of the Cambodians. So by rooting out, by uprooting Sihanouk and the monarchy, I think the Americans made a big mistake in a sense that the Khmer Republic never really found some strong supporters, and thereby they engaged into a policy of, I would say, ultra-nationalist policy that was mainly orientated towards anti-Vietnamese feeling. Anti-Vietnamese pogroms were developed, and the Khmer Republic, I think, managed very well in desacralizing the monarchy and in instituting a kind of state ultranationalism based on the hatred of foreigners, and especially Vietnamese. And this is a trait that you will find also in common with the Khmer Rouge eventually. So a lot of the racial or race-based policy was started during the Khmer Republic. But anyway, as you know, eventually the U.S. pulled out with the agreement, the China-U.S. kind of new resumption of relation, 1972, President Nixon and so on, and the Vietnamization of the war, and eventually the U.S. pulling out from the region and losing to the communists with the fall of Saigon and the fall of Phnom Penh. What is interesting is that already starting from the Sihanouk period, in the late 60s, Sihanouk had managed to alienate himself from a lot of Cambodian, I wouldn't say Democrats, but a lot of Cambodians' opponents, who increasingly, because he had forced them out of the political circuit, radicalized themselves. They radicalized towards the right, and they are these people who took over power in 1970, but they many also radicalized towards the left. Some people, like one of the people who are now waiting for trial, Khieu Samphan, for instance, then Minister of Foreign Affairs during the Khmer Rouge period, was publicly humiliated and stripped of his clothes during the Sihanouk period, and eventually moved to the forest to fight against the Sihanouk regime. So by the 1960s, you had already some pockets of guerrilla within Cambodia with support of the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese. And so by 1970, this resistance amplified so much, especially as Cambodia, together with Laos, underwent a period of massive bombing. Maybe this is an area in the world which has gone through undergone the largest bombing in the history of mankind. Eastern Cambodia and southern eastern part of Laos were so bombed that the whole social fabric there was completely, in many ways, destroyed, and with many people flooding into the cities, especially Phnom Penh, and others joining the Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge were very good at using the nationalist patriotic feeling against, not just the Americans, against anything foreign. And anything foreign meant also, for instance, Chinese influence, ethnic Chinese, not China. They didn't, and the cities were regarded as this cradle of alienness to real Cambodianness. And this is something that the Khmer Rouge, or discourse that the Khmer Rouge were really used very strongly. And eventually, by 1975, after already 2 or 3 years before, the Khmer Republic only controlled the cities. They could not control the countryside. In April 1975, Phnom Penh fell to the Khmer Rouge. And then this is where it's very interesting, is that from that time on, the world realized that these people were not just communist fighters, the same way you could see them in Vietnam, for instance, or in China. You had a very unique breed of communist fighters who, in many ways, and that's why I'm going back to this Angkorian issue, you have a form of, I would call a desperate nationalism. Desperate, historically desperate, in a sense that these people, in Pol Pot especially, but all his friends, were all French educated. Khieu Samphan, whom I mentioned, wrote his PhD thesis in Paris already back in the 60s, early 60s, where he wrote that the Khmer have to resort to their own Angkorian roots. They have to strip Cambodia and the society of anything alien that is responsible for their weakness, inherent weakness, including Buddhism. Buddhism has turned Cambodians into too peaceful and too passive people. Foreign influence has to be stripped. We have to go back to this Angkorian grandeur. But this Angkorian grandeur was very much the one that they had read in French books. And the core program of the Khmer Rouge is very closely connected to this interpretation of the ancient Angkorian idea of Cambodia. And to give you a good example, in the 1930s, a French scholar working on Angkor was using a theory on irrigation and water system to explain why Angkor had been such an enormous undertaking. It's a massive complex of temples. And his theory was that the ancient Khmer had developed a very sophisticated irrigation system that made them unable to free enough workforce, who otherwise were working in cropping rice, to build these massive temples. Well, the Khmer Rouge who read this, the intellectuals who became Khmer Rouge leaders, had an obsession with irrigation program. So once they were in power, they removed cities from their people and forced most of their people to work in this grandiloquent irrigation projects that had no real, how do you say, no connection with the ideological reality. But these massive programs killed thousands and thousands of people. They were not killed, they died of exhaustion, of hunger, and bad treatments, etc. So As you mentioned, in fact, Cambodia lost 1/3, more or less, of its population during the Khmer Rouge episode. Some particular areas of Cambodian societies were targeted. I mentioned about cities. Buddhist monks were not systematically killed. They were forced to be defrocked. That means they were humiliated, and they were basically forced to deny their own religious affiliation. And of course, intellectuals of any kind were systematically liquidated. Crazy things like money. You know that during Angkor, we still think, historians think there was no money in Angkor. They abolished money. They abolished roads, because roads lead to cities, and since they abolished cities, why do you need roads? I mean, you got into this autarkic kind of mad model that they tried to impose upon society. And you had slogans like, if we have, our ancestors built Angkor, therefore we can rebuild ourselves into a nation that can defeat the Vietnamese, reclaim our land, defeat the Americans, etc. You have this kind of mentality of like that grew up, of paranoia, that really rooted itself. Of course, the leaders also took inspiration from the Cultural Revolution in China. There are many common traits, definitely, but not in the same, I think, sophisticated way. It was very blunt. In China, you humiliated the educated people, you destroyed them morally, not physically. In Cambodia, you destroyed them physically. So by 1979, and again, I'm simplifying, I'm going fast, the regime had grown so paranoid that it was engaged into, it started to engage into a deliberate attack on the Vietnamese border. And eventually this led to a Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia in January 1979. By then, by January 79, the Vietnamese found a country that was no longer really a functioning structure. So leading to this period now, and I'm going to be now shorter, what is interesting and important to understand is that in Cambodia, any actions that leads to rebuild society has to take into account the fact that often the foundations of the conditions for a society to function have been in many ways destroyed. For instance, the language. The language is not still today fully standardized to absorb a number of concepts and terms that we take for granted that are needed if you want to go a step further in your education. There's still not yet a modernized dictionary, Khmer dictionary. General education that was slowly rebuilding is still very weak in a sense that people often don't have the, as I said, the conceptual tools to embrace more specialized knowledge. And in fact, during the Vietnamese period and afterwards, the universities that had been created during Sihanouk were transformed into a teacher school. You had to restart the process from the beginning. And this means that until today, you have a still very fragile society. It's a society made up, it's a society that is very resilient, very strong, as resistant to any kind of terrible challenges. The Cambodians managed to survive, to go through this process. They reconstituted themselves around their monasteries, Buddhist monasteries. They desperately needed to cling to some elements of hope and continuity, and monarchy and Buddhism became again very important. So, personally, I'm not very much a monarchist, but coming to Cambodia, I discovered that monarchy is an important factor of still today of stability, or the king, or the idea of the king, and Buddhism is very important. Okay, coming to the current period, with the end of the Cold War, Cambodia emerged eventually through a number of negotiations between the different factions. Over 500,000 Cambodians who lived through the Khmer Rouge had escaped during the pro-Vietnamese regime and lived in refugee camps in Thailand. Thousands moved to many countries, including in the US, France, Australia, Canada, for the largest number of them. You had basically a fragmented society divided into different factions, which, with the end of the Cold War, eventually were forced to negotiate for a post-Cold War, post-communist era. And this led to the Paris Agreement in 1991. And 93 was the first election, democratic election, held in Cambodia. But during the whole period, the ex-communist or pro-Vietnamese, ex-pro-Vietnamese government very much controlled the reign of power. And today they are still there. And they're still very much in charge or in control of Cambodia. They changed the name of the party to the name of the Cambodian Popular Party. The Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, who is the strongman of Cambodia, Prime Minister Hun Sen, came to power in 1986. He was then one of the youngest head of states, and is today a relatively young leader. Sihanouk came back as a former king, but the monarchy was very weakened. Today, the head of state of Cambodia is still is the son of Sihanouk, King Norodom Sihamoni, but he has virtually no influence on his people. And you have a relatively fragile, functioning democracy, parliamentarian democracy, with the CPP, as I say, as the strong party. And there are two main opposition parties, one especially the Samranzi party, which is, I would say, more, people say Republican, but deep down it's more, I would say, a bit more democratic party, made up of Cambodians from the diaspora. And they are actually the main reason now, I would say, elements to promote democratic dialogue within Cambodia. They are so they, in a way, they need support, even though their political program is far from being that of a usual democratic party in many ways. It still uses a lot of anti-foreign rhetoric. And you have the royalists who have lost a lot of their, I think, prestige. And then what is interesting, in fact, is that I would conclude this general presentation to say that you don't really have yet still a functioning nation-state society as we're used to. You have the element of it from the superficial elements, but you don't yet have, for instance, a proper government. The culture of an accountable government working for the public good, and I'm a bit harsh, but it's very true in many ways, is very much in the hands of private interests. The notion of government is not very clear in Cambodia. It's more a notion of private, I would say, clique or groups who control reign of power, with whom you have to deal for anything. The notion of public and private, separation between public and private interests is not really there. As I mentioned at lunch to some of my colleagues, recently I found out that the Cambodian embassy in Singapore, which belongs to the state of Cambodia, was sold by the current Deputy Prime Minister. for his own private interests. That's a good example. The whole seaside of Cambodia has been sold now to private interests. Phnom Penh, the city of Phnom Penh, has, for the last 2 years, has undergone massive forced displacement of people, poor people, to give way to real estate investors, but in a very crude way. Just last year, 30,000 people were evicted. People mentioned that this was the largest number of people evicted since the Khmer Rouge evicted all the population of Phnom Penh. Most of Cambodia, the natural resources, forest resources, have been logged illegally, and so on. So in that sense, it's a very sad story that I'm telling you. But in many ways, it's a very young country, 16, 17 million people, and 75% of the population are below 40 years old, so they haven't really experienced the Khmer Rouge. And you have, in this kind of, despite all these problems, because Cambodia very much rely on aid. For the last years, Cambodia has been the largest recipient of international aid per capita in the world. Despite the corruption, despite the lack of transparency in governance and so on, you have the money at some point trickled down to a certain extent within society, and tourism also is a major source of revenue for Cambodia, especially with Angkor, which has become a World Heritage Site, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Governments, especially Chinese business and governments have massively invested in Cambodia. These are sectors that have contributed to a certain extent to build the, I hope, the embryo of a new civil society, at least a middle class in a cultural and sociological sense of the term. Economically, already you have a middle class. If you go to Phnom Penh now, you see a bustling city like other Southeast Asian cities, with youth going by with their motorbike, buying things, going to cafes, etc. So there is now very much an improved way of life, at least in the cities. And you have many of these young people who now are very much concerned about investing in education. The educational sector, and I will go maybe into detail when we have questions, because I didn't have time to talk about my own activities there before. People invest massively into education, and that's a good sign. A lot of the offsprings of the ruling elite who are going abroad to study. Many you find them in schools of Singapore, the US, Europe or Japan, maybe Taiwan also, and we hope that they will come back with an open attitude. The people in power basically are not necessarily extremely educated. They are not very much interested in controlling everything. They are not control freak people, as in Vietnam, or I would say even in China. They're interested in their own interests. A few years ago, Prime Minister Hun Sen was interviewed by the Time magazine, and he was asked by the journalist, what is your first interest or concern as a Prime Minister? And he said, bluntly, he said, my own survival. So that's why, if you look at the way, the economy functions, Hun Sen and his family and his clan are basically controlling all the reins of the economy in Cambodia. But despite of that, Cambodia is undergoing major transformation. Aid money has eventually had an effect, is having an effect. A lot of areas, such as education, health, are very much left in the hands of the private sector. And when I say private sector, it's either the profit-making sector, and this is not always very good because there's no standard. The state is not yet interested in setting standards. So there's a lot of abuse, obviously, but also in the hands of NGOs and aid projects, internationally led in most cases. These programs eventually have an effect, and you know, people are much happier than they were before in many ways. But if you go to the countryside, you will see that most places don't yet have electricity. Most of the agricultural resources are in very poor condition. Irrigation is bad. A lot of areas are threatened of desertification. So it's a balance. Recently, Cambodia, there were oil was found off the shores of Cambodia. A lot of people are worried about this, you know, this news, because there's a little chance that the revenue that may be generated from oil will really benefit the people of the general people of Cambodia. But we'll see. And this is basically the background of today's Cambodia. Sorry to have taken a bit too much time to focus on the history, but I thought that in relation especially to the movie we saw, that it is important for us to have a sense of why the Khmer Rouge episode took place in Cambodia. Okay, now I think we have, I will be very happy to answer your questions, and especially maybe to talk about my own experience, because I didn't have time to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Picon. The thing, before we started the question and answer session, there's a major part for Professor Picon's presentation we haven't talked about, is how can Taiwan participate in this transformation for the Cambodia. A lot of people had visited Cambodia, especially Angkor, as a tourist. But for Taiwan, there's still a lot of things we don't know about Cambodia. We know there's, it's been considered a paradise for the outlaws these days. A lot of businessmen, they went there, taking the opportunity and taking this great chances of, if you can bribe someone, you can get the profit, and you can get the timber, you can get the raw materials from the countries. And we also saw the former gangsters also staying in Cambodia. And these are the things, it's not a proper way we should deal or interact with the Cambodian society or as a nation. But recently there's some promising signs. Some of the medical NGO groups have been there. And we are hoping more and more young people, they can go to Cambodia and to recognize what kind of tragedy have been happening there, and to see if Taiwan can really help. I understand from some interview that Mr. Picon had really Taiwan had quite a big influence on the perception of the Cambodia people over there. So in the following question and answer session, we'll welcome all of you to maybe raise some of the personal experience you have with Cambodia, or the things you'd like to know about this country.
Aid, it goes into the wrong hands. I mean, we got $100,000 cars out there. They got Lexus and stuff in this nature. But we have children. They're called scavengers, and they're out in the streets. But the thing about it is, like, as soon as they see me, they're asking for dollars. But they will, heaven prohibits that they would even get near that car. Now, this gentleman over here, he's talking about aid. How in the world do I get that dollar to that child? Instead of this guy over here, it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just like, you know, he's probably 30 pounds, maybe 50 pounds overweight. But this poor children over here, it's just like, do you understand? How do I take this dollar? If it's just like, okay, here's Taiwan. We want to help Cambodia, right? How do I take this dollar and see that it goes to this child? Because, of course, they got a mafia over there. Mr. Hun San, he was, what, PM for 23 years? Yeah. What's the odds of him being PM next, I don't know, till the day he dies? And not only that, but what are the odds of his children coming into play? You know, so I understand what you're saying, because, like I said, I live there. But the thing is, I'm not a billionaire, so I don't have the money to be given to these children. So what would you say?
Well, what I would say is that, yes, I mean, first of all, when we talk about aid, there are different types of aid, and that's often a part of the problem. When we talk about international aid, institutional aid that is channeled through the Cambodian government, then obviously there is often the risk that this aid is diverted. And so much, all the much so because of the fact that now Cambodia is increasingly attractive for many countries for a number of reasons, economic as well as geostrategic, which means that, for instance, every year you have this annual donor conference of all the countries that discussed how much money will be given to Cambodia. Roughly $500 million are directly given in aid from these countries. And usually, though it doesn't go very far, but a number of countries are voicing concerns about the fact that nothing has been done to stamp out massive corruption practices on the part of the government. They want more results, more evidence that things are changing, and in many ways they were able to impose some changes. Especially at the moment, the focus is very much on encouraging decentralization of power in order to monitor more clearly the way money is dispatched from the government. I'm talking now international aid first, institutional. But 2 years ago, the Prime Minister or President of China visited Cambodia and offered more money than all the money combined by all the other countries. And basically he told the Prime Minister Hun Sen, it's Hun Sen, who proudly mentioned on the TV in Cambodia, he said, China is Cambodia's best friend because they told us there's no string attached. So, when we talk about international aid, that's already an issue, is that how to make sure that countries do things the proper way and don't just let themselves being manipulated, I would say, or used by the people in control. That's international institutional aid, and I'm simplifying, but it's basically still a big problem. Then there is a lot of private aid in Cambodia, and I would say that, and talking about Taiwan especially, I think that when you go to Cambodia, if you go beyond Angkor, because a lot of people just go to Angkor, but if you go to Phnom Penh, or if you go to Battambang, or the countryside a bit, you will see a lot of evidence of very, I think, worthy initiatives that come from, I would say, international civil society initiatives. For instance, I've been tough on the U.S. on their foreign policy, but I used to work for an organization that was mostly privately funded within the U.S. by U.S. foundations and individuals. The U.S. is extremely generous in this kind of private way to get money and to reach out to people within society. Japan is also very generous in many ways, and many other places and countries. So, okay, how to make sure that your money go, unfortunately you need to do a bit of homework before you go to the country, because there are a number of institutions, NGOs, that are, doing good job. And often they are working on a shoestring basis, and it is very tough. At least I will tell you more about my field. There are very few, there may be a handful of these NGOs. I showed you this center, Bopana, for instance. Okay, these ones work on a yearly basis budget. So any contribution for them make a major difference. And in Cambodia, a small dollar can make a big difference. And you can see it very quickly. That's one of the great thing of working in an NGO or in a project in Cambodia. If you live there, if you work there, you will see the impact pretty rapidly. It's not something that is virtual. And that's, I think, encouraging. So I would encourage you to step out a bit of the main tourist tracks and try to read a bit, find out a bit who is doing what in various fields, whether it is health, whether it is education, water, environment, and so on. There are a lot of people who are doing things, and usually these people don't get much support from these institutional donors that I mentioned earlier, and that's unfortunate. Talking about Taiwan, and I think many people may have special ideas and experience in that. I thought, and I think because I lived there and being in regular contact with people and so on, people know Taiwan mostly because of Taiwanese products or Taiwanese investment through business. In a way, Taiwan is very successful in having established its reputation as a country that produces good quality and affordable material. Can be a motorbike, can be an electronic, whatever. People will tell you, okay, if you want this pen, if you buy the Japanese one, it's very good, but it's so expensive you can't buy it. Then if you want the very cheap one, you have the Chinese one, but it won't last very long. A Taiwanese one is good. That's the one I recommend you. That's often what you get from conversation. So I think, in a way, Taiwan overall has an image. And the fact that a lot of its businessmen are independent businessmen, sometimes it's not necessarily good because a lot of abuse takes place, and that's true. And this is also true that you often hear in the local press cases of abuse by Taiwanese businessmen or Koreans, and the way they treat their workers and so on. That's something they have to rectify in terms of image. But overall, if Taiwanese initiatives in any kind of fields, environment, humanitarian, whatever, can shift this image of good and affordable and accessible quality to something that is more, altruistic, I think people will quite rapidly will react to it because of this image that is already there. So there's plenty of things to do in Cambodia in terms of aid, and I would welcome more specific questions, I guess, in that matter.
I was told that Professor Pecan had a plane to catch at 4 o'clock, so we will have to entertain some short questions and comments, maybe 3 or 4.
I would like to focus on the infrastructure building that you mentioned, like in the beginning of the, like in the movie and in the end of your presentation, because it's the most interesting part for me. And could you share some personal experience for the infrastructure building and creative knowledge that you mentioned in the handbook that, like, according to your personal experience, that's most interesting for you? Thank you.
Thank you very much, because you get me finally to talk about my own experience, which is the topic of, the title of my presentation. Okay, yes. Myself, as a historian and a scholar by training, I was always interested, fascinated by the fact that Cambodia attracts so much high-level scholarship because of Angkor, because of Khmer Rouge issue, from all over the world, and yet so little has an impact upon society. And also, I also felt that too much of this focus is always going on either this ancient past or this tragedy, the Khmer Rouge tragedy, and not much about the people, society, and so on. So I tried, when I arrived in '99, together, I was involved in a discussion to create an institute that would try to match these two needs, building capacities for Cambodians to be able to basically contribute to build a community of creative thinkers in Cambodia. What I mean by creative thinkers or creative responsible citizens, I will talk about, of course, educators, whether school teachers, but also journalists, writers, elements that contribute to forge a sense of public good and public communality in a society that otherwise doesn't have much of this sense of being part of a broader project. So we thought that since we were small and we were a privately funded organization, we thought we should identify some strategic points where we could make an impact. And we identified and we discovered as we went that each time we wanted to do anything that was a bit too sophisticated or specialized, we lacked this intellectual infrastructure. And we could never have Cambodians to be part of it. And we didn't want to be an institution of foreigners talking about Cambodia. So we identified, for instance, the need for modernizing and working on the modernization of the language. It doesn't sound very easy, but I'm sure many of you, most of you, you know, for instance, how in China, in the 19th century, early 20th century, people worked so hard on modernizing, transforming the language, to coin it, to make it adaptable to Western knowledge and being able to respond to this challenge. Whereas in Cambodia, this process was never completed. So this is something that sounds very sometimes abstract, especially for Westerners, but it is a very important thing, and it doesn't cost so much. So we train a number of people to translate material. We use linguists, Cambodian linguists, mostly from outside, to develop the first grammar of Cambodia, to publish the first history of Cambodia, and to develop glossaries, indexes, and in fact to coin new terms. It sounds very, again, like a luxury to do this kind of thing. But in fact, in the case of Cambodia, it's essential. You cannot still yet have a proper, intellectual discussion in Khmer. So, this is a key problem. Then, of course, we wanted to to build a repository of knowledge, meaning libraries, that would be accessible to people. But we didn't want to compromise on the quality. So we built especially one main library, which today is, I think, the best library in Cambodia, in Siem Reap, in this Buddhist monastery, which I have photos that I should show you now. Yeah, this is Angkor Wat, of course. Now you can go, the next one. Okay, this is just, I wanted to do a quick photo album. This is the Royal Palace in Phnom Penh. Yes, next one. That's the National Museum, which is one of the most amazing museums in the world, that will give you a sense of the depth of this Cambodian civilization. This is in Phnom Penh, and therefore if you have gone to Angkor, you have to go back to just visit this museum. We help this museum a lot. Next one. Okay, an example of a university. Next one, you can, again, next one. This is an example of a project, different from ours, which focus on artists. And it has been training a lot of artists and also working with young people to identify elements of the daily life of Cambodia that were fast disappearing. For instance, you have musicians, you have craftsmen. Cambodian silk, Khmer silk, is recognized as one of the most supreme in the world, where most of the masters perished during the Khmer Rouge, and only few survived, and they're old, and you need to find them and to bring them to work with young disciples to reconnect between generations, like we saw in the movie. This institution is doing that for vernacular art practice. Unfortunately, this institute now is closing because of lack of funds. That's an example. For 12 years, it's a Cambodian French refugee and an American woman they run this institute on a shoestring, and eventually she passed away, sadly, because life is pretty tough there, and he just he wants to stop because of exhaustion. That's a good example of these people are doing some good work, and unfortunately they are not really supported. Next one. Okay, yeah, that's a monastery. That's the monastery where my institute built its library. Next one. Okay, this is our the library that we built in Angkor in Siem Reap. It is basically buildings from a monastery that were largely destroyed during the Khmer Rouge. We restored this building and turned them into now, I think, the best academic library in Cambodia, but public as well. Next one. Yeah, you have next one. Next one. Okay, and next one. This is photos of the new wing that was opened in January. Next one. That's the King of Cambodia opening the library. He's the patron of the library. Next one. Next one again. This is okay. This is the interior. That's all. That's the end of my album. But okay, this is my institute. The institute that I helped set up is called the Center for Khmer Studies. We received funding, especially from the Rockefeller Foundation, and they helped us develop a very forward-looking program that aimed at training young university professors to develop general knowledge in history, in anthropology, in economic science, political science, and develop textbooks and reference books that could then be used for their teaching and the reading of young, I think more junior teachers. We also helped a number of national institutions like the museum to build the capacity, etc. I think there are, just in this area, I would just think about 3 or 4 institutions that do very great work. I showed you about the Bopana Center. This project, I think this library especially is a good example. There are projects to revitalize Khmer dance and what we call performing arts. There's a center called Cambodia Living Arts, which focus on living masters. We have, there's another one that maybe I could write eventually a short list of this institution for you to look at. Khmer dance projects, systematically recording and interviewing Khmer dance masters, especially because this government in Cambodia a few years ago got rid of the campus of the university, which had the Department of Performing Arts for real estate, interest. As a result, the transmission of performing arts, traditional performing arts, that was mainly effective through this university program has been basically erased. That's an example where you have to react as much as you can. A number of projects like that dealing with musicology, music, and other activities. Just in the area of, a very important project on books. Much for children. Of course, children books are very popular for donors, including institutional donors. Primary schools are very good also for donors to build the buildings. But when it comes to train the teachers and produce material for the teachers to be able to teach, they are less forthcoming because it's less visible. So there's one NGO that focuses on children and I would say intermediate secondary education level young people by translating material in Khmer, or not translating, producing material in Khmer. So these elements may be small, but eventually, ultimately, this library is a good example. You have about 100 plus people per day who go to visit this library. Bopana Center is also, when you go, you visit it, is crowded by young people. There are many of these activities eventually manage to constitute the embryo of a community of receptive Cambodians. And these people, usually you find them later on working on projects and eventually taking on jobs even within the government. So in the future, that's a way to do it. But I'm just talking about culture and education. There are many other areas.
And I'm just wondering that from your observations, is Cambodia susceptible to another genocide if a power arises amid the current instability of the country, or are the Cambodians who are the victims of the Khmer Rouge Holocaust have the power to stop such tragedy from happening again?
So is Cambodia likely to experience again a tragedy like the Khmer Rouge? Yes and no. I mean, no in the sense that foreseeing a future, the geopolitical problems in the region are not such that such a terrible event take place. I mean, hadn't been the Vietnam War and the Cold War, you wouldn't have necessarily have the Khmer Rouge. So in that sense, that period was very unique historically. But yes, for instance, if you look at Thailand today, you see the problem. The internal situation in Thailand, in which you really have a deeply rooted opposition of almost 50-50% between people in the countryside that were in many ways neglected for a long time and people in cities who emerge into a kind of affluent middle class. In the case of Cambodia, eventually I think this could be the risk as well. If the contrast between the poor people and the people in cities that are increasingly affluent persists. And that, I think, in the long run, is not good for the stability of the country, the political stability. So even Thailand, that we tend to take for much more advanced and developed and so on, in many ways, they have a problem due to the lack of distribution of wealth that has been going on for so many years, and what now a number of people call elite capture, the capture of resources by a small group within society. And that, I think, it's a risk for Cambodia, yes.
Cambodia is a new member to ASEAN, only participating in the association in late 1990s. And with all these very developed and rich countries like Singapore and huge country like Indonesia with rich resources and huge population, do you think the Cambodia will be an obstacle to the regional integration in terms of its political conflicts and also economic development, or it will be smoothly integrated in this regional community to become a better country?
Thank you. I don't know that. I don't know. ASEAN, I think there are obviously some differences in perspective. I think it's important that a number of countries in ASEAN has tried to raise some standard vis-à-vis countries like Cambodia, including Indonesia or the Philippines, Thailand in some way, but it's a bit more complicated. I think I don't know. I mean, I don't think Cambodia is in a capacity to influence much the way ASEAN will integrate. But it is important, I think, within ASEAN and beyond, actually, and I would think going back to Taiwan, it's very important, in my view, for the region, not just for Cambodia. And Cambodia is a key country, even though it's a very small one, because everybody can have a stake in Cambodia. Unfortunately, you can buy your stake in Cambodia. And it's good that if it is done in a good way, then it could also impact positively regionally. And I think maybe the qualitative edge of a vibrant and democratic society like Taiwan, for instance, but also within ASEAN, vis-à-vis Cambodian society, I think contributes very much to the interest of the region as a whole, including to get China to understand that they have also to respect the people of these countries, not just the leaders. And that's often the problem. When Hun Sen proudly say that China is the best friend of Cambodia, it's not good. And so I think your question, I think, to me, goes beyond ASEAN.
Thank you. In Minnesota, in the United States, we have the second largest concentration of Cambodian and Hmong refugees from Southeast Asia, and I work at the Wilder Foundation, where we provide housing and employment assistance, but we also provide mental health services for a lot of the refugee people in St. Paul. And my question is, do you know of any research regarding providing mental health services? Because what we're doing in St. Paul is we're using the Western model of definitions of psychiatry and psychology and providing mental health services in a really Western way, and it doesn't seem like it's providing meeting the needs of the people because they're not from the West.
Actually, Minnesota is not the second largest concentration of Cambodians in the US. Second is in Lowell, Massachusetts. The first is in Long Beach in California. But yeah, no, but what you say, yes, there are initiatives, especially in Australia. There's a professor, I have to remember his name, who's been working for many years on this issue. I know also of a Cambodian scholar who is in France, but I saw her actually recently in Cambodia working on this issue. So I will be very happy to send you their contact.
Okay, that will conclude the session for this afternoon. Thank you all for coming to Taipei Salon, and let's have a round of applause for Professor Picon.